thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well, that's the
you
game
wouldn't have
theory
done
I was
that.
talking
You
about
wouldn't
above.
have. You wouldn't have done that before.
That's not an immediate.
No, you wouldn't have done.
The thing is, I made a very similar point. Because of these racist hiring policies, you now are not sure was the best pilot hired.
A long time ago, there was this baseball player, a pitcher to be exact, a guy who was actually pretty good at his job named Roy Halladay. He died in a plane crash somewhere off the coast of his own house because he had one of those houses that was actually on the coast, and he had one of those private little planes that, let's just say, would eventually get recalls a little bit later on. Then you fast forward about 10 or 11 years and you see DEI. Now, granted, Roy Halladay was flying his own plane. Of course, if you've ever taken a plane before, more likely than not, chances are you've boarded that thing, not thinking too much of who the pilot is. Now, there's a little story that goes along with this from my own personal past, which I'll tell you more towards the end. But a lot of people are looking at this, let's just say, comment from Charlie Kirk, or what was said in this little snippet that he had the other night with Jack Posobiec, and people are automatically thinking that what he said was actually racist. However, the thing is this right here. I think just about everybody out there automatically thinks that diversity, equity, inclusion is going to cause some problems later on, not just safety problems, not just problems like, say, I don't know, people not being qualified for the job. As a matter of fact, this entire rule goes for all people of all races. But then when you actually hear the context of it, you would think to yourself, well, wow, I guess what he said was or could be perceived to be. But then we've got the whole grift factor, which is what we're going to be talking mostly about in this video, because it was the soy Krasensteins who decided to blow this issue up. And now they are, let's just say, paying a bit of a price for it. But let's listen to the full clip in context.
And that's why I think this United story and the DEI story hits so hard, because we've all been in the back of a plane when the turbulence hits, or when you're flying through a storm and you're like, I'm so glad I saw the guy with the right stuff and the square jaw get into the cockpit before we took off. And I feel better now thinking about that.
No, I mean, like, you want to go thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well, that's the
you
game
wouldn't have
theory
done
I was
that.
talking
You
about
wouldn't
above.
have. You wouldn't have done that before.
That's not an immediate.
No, you wouldn't have done
That's
that
not who
before.
I am. That's
No.
not what I believe.
It is the reality the left has
But
created.
I think I have flown in my life maybe 6 or 7 times. The first time was to New York when I was 16 years old. We actually saw the pilot before we went in. The co-pilot was black. I remember that. Safe and sound, okay. And then, of course, there was another situation where the pilot was, let's just say, I think he looked to me like maybe he was Indian, of course, with a white guy. Of course, we got there safe and sound. But the last time I got on a plane, it was actually a white guy, and it was a flight coming back. And as I was flying back in, the turbulence kind of picked up, and we thought we were going to crash right outside the airport in Raleigh. We got out, no big deal, but it looked to me like the pilots were white. Now, granted, that was 2 years ago. What I'm trying to say is that anybody can obviously screw things up. However, the thing about diversity, equity, inclusion is that it could lead to, let's just go ahead and say, different feelings towards different people because of the reasons why said person was hired. Now, of course, this thing also led to this massive grift machine on Twitter, which we'll get to here in a second. It was the Krasensteins, and then they got into it with Tim Pool, which I thought was pretty entertaining, but obviously, and like the previous video that is thumbnailed, Tim Pool was wrong to, well, I guess Tim Pool was right in this case. I think we need to speak about this. The fact of the matter is that anybody can screw things up, okay, and anybody can be successful. Diversity, equity, inclusion, however, muddies the waters on this because people will automatically assume that a person got the job because of their race. Now, this right here is going to sound like a bit of a contradiction from some of my previous content, but in reality, it's not. I am very, very much in favor of people who are qualified for the jobs, but I don't want people who aren't qualified for the job or have no knowledge of the job that they have, or very, very, let's just say very low amounts of knowledge for the job actually doing said job. That's basically the point of this entire situation. So when you hear Charlie say, I'm going to play it one more time.
And that's why I think this United story and the DEI story hits so hard, because we've all been in the back of a plane when the turbulence hits, or when you're flying through a storm and you're like, I'm so glad I saw the guy with the right stuff and the square jaw get into the cockpit before we took off. And I feel better now thinking about that.
No, I mean, like, you want to go thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well,
that's the
you
game
wouldn't have
theory
done
I
that.
talked
You
about
wouldn't
it.
have. You
No,
wouldn't
and
have done
that's
that
not,
before.
That's not an immediate.
No, you wouldn't
that's
have done
not
that
who I
before.
am. That's
No.
not what I believe.
It is the reality the left has
But
created.
Basically, diversity, equity, inclusion is quite frankly dangerous, extremely dangerous. However, it's also very possible because of diversity, equity, inclusion that we could have a few incidents where, let's just say, that mythical racism may actually, how do I say, come to light in a way that, quite frankly, you did not think it was going to. So obviously, people are going to feel justified for, let's just say, thinking that maybe a person got the job more so not based upon their merits, but basically based upon something else. Fact of the matter is, it's dangerous for all kinds of reasons. And yeah, this right here is another symptom of it. I'm just talking about the confusion that this entire situation could create, and also the paranoia. It's very possible that people may have perceived it a certain way when in reality what he was really trying to say was, gee, I hope this is not somebody who was brought in for the whole diversity, equity, inclusion quota. There are long-term effects as a result of this that quite frankly could happen. And if you guys recall correctly, I did a video on this recently, and there was a little story that went along with this that had been reported on that made people automatically think that this was the case.
37 MAX 9 fleet. The United Airlines now says that it's found loose bolts during inspections of its 737 MAX 9 fleet. The airline and others grounding those flights after Friday's incident involving an Alaska Airlines plane that took off from Portland. A door plug blew out moments after takeoff, and that door has now been found. New video from inside this Boeing 737 MAX 9 shows federal investigators combing through the plane as they work to figure out what went wrong. The door plug flew off midair during an Alaska Airlines flight on Friday, leaving a gaping hole.
I look to my left and there's this huge chunk, part of the airplane, just like missing.
The door plug now found after a 3-day search. It ended up in the backyard of a Portland school teacher. The discovery coming as the National Transportation Safety Board has revealed no data can be pulled from the cockpit voice recorder because it was completely overwritten.
At 2 hours, it re-records over it. So we have nothing from the CVR.
171 Boeing 737 MAX 9 planes are now grounded around the world. The Federal Aviation Administration ordering enhanced inspections of both the left and right cabin door exit plugs, door components, and fasteners before those planes can get back in the air.
We are emergency. We are depressurized. We do need to return back.
The plane was taking off from Portland, Oregon Friday evening, heading to Ontario, California, with 179 people on board, when all of a sudden the so-called door plug, which is used to cover and seal optional emergency exits, flew off from the 26th row. Thankfully, the 2 seats next to it were empty, the plane depressurizing.
And we've had this conversation already about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I've told you guys exactly what could happen as a result of this, the effects. However, I don't think we ever really talked about the paranoia of it and why it is that people may automatically perceive that something is, let's just say, not exactly on the up and up, meaning that people are automatically going to assume that this person got the job because of a certain thing as far as qualifications were not met, but more or less they got hired because of the color of their skin. I don't think that what happened here with the case of Charlie was really that. However, I do believe that it is very, very possible that this right here is the paranoia that people are probably going to feel when they run into this. The airline is saying that diversity, equity, inclusion had nothing to do with this, but then again, that when your new policy is diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course, if something goes wrong as a result of this, you may be a little bit hesitate to say it out loud. But still, at the same time, the fear will always be there because you're bringing in people that, quite frankly, may not be qualified. But then again, at the same time, take it from a guy who was a bit of a screw-up on some of the jobs himself. Anybody can screw up anything. It does happen. We don't need it to happen. People who screw up obviously need to be fired. However, the thing is this right here, when it comes to flight time and flight hours and knowledge of planes, just go ahead and know right away that it does require somebody with a lot of experience who's not only qualified, but probably experienced before they actually get the position. Hence the reason why I brought up Roy Halladay, who did not have that much flight time. I didn't tell you that earlier because I wanted to wait till now to tell you guys about it, where he crashed a plane in which he tragically lost his life. The thing is this right here. People automatically jump the gun on this situation thinking that what Charlie Kirk said was absolutely racist. And by the way, there will be another video involving Charlie Kirk tomorrow because we got some news about the border that we'll get to that will be out to go along with this video here. Fact of the matter is that diversity, equity, inclusion could create a different type of racism, which we'll talk about in later videos. But I'll be leaving this video right here in the description box from a guy called Consider Culture. He's made a lot of content. I would say that this video here was really kind of good. He doesn't seem to me like he's a wokester or anything. He's actually very much against that type of stuff. But he talks about the dangers of creating a different breed of, let's just say, racism. But the thing is this right here. The diversity, equity, inclusion stuff will, for the most part, make people pause about hopping on a plane. It may make people pause about possibly getting a certain medical diagnosis because of the whole affirmative action thing. Affirmative action as a whole has screwed this entire thing up and has created some great big giant sense of paranoia. So if Charlie Kirk goes onto a plane and he says what he said or he thinks what he thought, I'm not going to say I agree with him. I'm not going to say I disagree with him, but I'm going to say that I empathize with him because of what diversity, equity, inclusion could potentially create as far as long-term effects. But then you get to this little exchange between the Krasensteins and Tim Pool, which was really more Tim Pool calling them out for grifting off this said quote.
Followers. He says, Charlie Kirk quote, "I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified." He then says, Charlie Kirk is racist. Is there any other word for this? If that's not racism, then what is? This is the dirty, dirty game they play. Now I responded. I said, these guys act stupid in order to bait the right and generate ratios because they get paid more money. Ed knows exactly what Charlie is saying, that racist hiring policies give him pause, not that he thinks race plays a factor in skill. It's actually that simple. If a company is engaged in a racist hiring policy, I have concerns about the qualities of the people who are engaged in these jobs. I don't care what their race is. If someone said, we are going to hire based on height instead of skill, and I walk in and I see a 6'7" guy flying the plane, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. There's no difference. I'm not heightist. I'm making the point that the company says...
Really quick, you only saw roughly about 30 or 45 seconds there. We'll play some more of it here in a second. The Krasensteins had a debate recently with Destiny, Darren Beatty, Alex Jones, Ian Crossland. He is the one who moderated it. Glenn Greenwald was there, and they were talking about the merits of 1-6. Now, the debate, and like I've said before, I don't typically do debates nor want to do debates because, quite frankly, these debates are no longer about defending ideology or even having a conversation about the topic because these debates always find a way to devolve into absolute chaos. This right here was a great example of it. If you actually saw that debate, which is on Rumble, I think Destiny's got it on his channel. And, of course, you can find it, I want to say on Ian Crossland's channel, too. I'm not sure. The debate completely devolved into nothing more to, you see, I got him, but he was wrong. Yeah, it basically devolved into that there. And, of course, if you do watch it, you will find out that the Krasensteins are two guys who, quite frankly, are full of soy. Extreme levels of soy. I mean, these guys really and truly are softies. They're only about maybe 5'5", 5'6". They try to dress themselves up like they're like God's gift to women or whatnot, but in reality, they just come off looking metrosexual. They even talk like this right here. Yeah, they actually have a voice that soft. You probably would get the impression these people are, in fact, full of soy, and you'd also get, in before you get done with this little section, you probably think that these guys are complete total grifters who are obviously taking advantage of a quote to share it to their audience, so that way people automatically get the negative idea because, of course, it is a very, very liberal following that Ed and Brian have. Now, there's something here that Tim is going to bring up here soon, which this is one of the reasons why I'm probably going to leave the full video in the description box, is written tests, log hours, flight time, medical tests, all that type of stuff there. Obviously, you've got to be able to pass all that stuff. Well, why would you need to pass the medical test? Well, you need to be able to pass the medical test so that way people know that you won't have a heart attack before you go in the air. Okay? Obviously, you need to be able to pass the medical test so that way you don't have any long-term lingering effects. Obviously, you need to pass a written test, which Tim broke down as in like, look, what's the actual scoring on the test, okay? Is there a different scoring model? What exactly do you have to pass the test? I don't know about you guys, but if a doctor, if somebody in medical school is going to be an actual doctor or physician, I would want said doctor to be scoring in the 80s and the 90s at the bare minimum before they even get to medical school, where they need to have like pristine actual grades. Okay, if you've got somebody who's about to open you up, you want to make sure they know what the hell they are doing. You want to make sure that they are actually good at what the hell they do. So obviously, when you fly a plane, which by the way, these planes oftentimes have close to 100 to 200 passengers on it, you need to make sure that you can get from point A to A, B safely. This is another reason why it is that the whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing has got people raising hell about it, which of course I've said that it's justified, because you're obviously going to be concerned about the qualifications of the pilot, the co-pilot, the crew, all that type of stuff, and even the mechanics involved. The thing is this right here. Let me use one more example before we go any further. When I went through the law enforcement academy, the state that I live in, the state of North Carolina, at the time, they were requiring that every single academy at least have a 70 for you to pass said class. Because when you go through the law enforcement academy, you got to go through certain blocks, certain little classes. For example, arrest, search, and seizure. Then you'll have elements, okay? And then you'll have, from elements, you'll have hazardous and waste materials, okay? You'll have all this type of stuff. Yeah, even fingerprinting, which I actually failed the first time around and passed the second time around. I got very, very paranoid about that class. Typically, if you fail and then you fail a second time, you get booted from the academy. Some academies have you or require you to pass a 70. Some academies say, look, if you fail 4, you're booted out. If you fail 5, you're booted out for good, even if you pass the re-exam. The one that I went to required you to score an 80 on said classes. The reason why was because they wanted to make sure that you had better overall knowledge before you went to your field training officer, which means that when you get hired by a police academy, you got to go through a separate academy, which is like a department procedures, protocol, all that type of stuff, rules and regulations. Department may have a different way they do things as far as the state's concerned, not too different, but just little adjustments. And then, of course, you get out there and you're with your field training officer. The same thing happens, I'm assuming, with, not the same thing, but I'm guessing the same thing would happen when it comes to actual pilots. Obviously, you want to make sure that the pilot that's in the plane, within the co-pilot, where you want to make sure that that person's actually squared away. You want to make sure they've obviously been trained very well. I'm pretty sure that a lot of these people have, but at the same time, this whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing, we really and truly have no idea exactly how far we've actually gotten with this as far as the overall training is concerned. I mean, most people think that you go through a certain amount of tests, you pass, you graduate, and all of a sudden you're inside the plane. No. More than likely, you're going to have to go through the actual training academy, or at least the FTO is what you would think you would have to have on these on these planes. The problem is we don't exactly know this yet, which also means that diversity, equity, inclusion could also backfire on these people as far as hiring is concerned, because at some point in time, those who may be considered to say, let's just say, weren't exactly cut out for the job may not get the job. However, we are not being given this information. We are being given information at this moment in time that simply says, because this person has a disability, because this person is a certain color, we're going to go ahead and bring him in with a job. So yes, people, of course, are going to be paranoid when they see DEI with certain airlines. So in that regard, I think that Charlie is correct.
Okay. So Ed Krasnstein responds to me. He says, Tim, I literally made $450 last pay period. My posts have nothing to do with money. I do know what Charlie is saying. Do you honestly think that unqualified pilots are being hired just because they are black? That's absurd. An airline pilot must pass a written exam, a practical flying test, and a medical exam. She must have an instrument rating, a commercial pilot's license, which require another written and practical exam, and also receive a multi-engine rating. Additionally, they must have regular check rides and ongoing proficiency tests, as well as a certain number of flight hours. Yeah, I want to say this, a little bit of a humble brag. The reason why people follow me, one of them, is because I'm not a moron, and I don't fall for these tricks. I'm going to pause for a second. I saw a debate between Alex Jones and Destiny, and I just couldn't. Ian Crossland was trying to moderate, and boy, the reason why I don't care for things like that is you're not going to bait me because I'm not stupid, Ed. I did not make a point about the qualifications of these pilots and their rating systems or otherwise. I made the point that you knew exactly what Charlie Kirk's point was, and you're doing this to generate engagement, which makes you money. Your response to me is an attempt to divert the argument into whether or not I believe unqualified pilots are being hired.
there's a little bit more.
I believe that these airlines are prioritizing race over skill, which could lead to a pilot of lesser skill being given the job. Oh boy, I hope he's qualified. The funny thing is I made a very similar point. Because of these racist hiring policies, you now are not sure was the best pilot hired.
Now is a little bit more on the paranoid scale, and of course I understand why he would be paranoid about it. You want to make sure that the person that is actually flying the plane is actually qualified, but still at the same time, that does not mean that because a pilot is black or a pilot is Hispanic or a pilot is brown, that does not mean that they can't actually do the job. Most people typically tend to not ask questions before they get on the plane, but still at the same time, Charlie's a little bit of paranoia here. I do think is warranted. However, there's a reason why it is that there are people out there like the Krasensteins who immediately put tweets up, which quite frankly are a little bit misleading, and they go ahead and start banging the drum on the whole racism narrative, especially when these two guys don't even leave their house and they live in an extremely white neighborhood. Of course, they're liberals too. Yeah, I think it's a little bit disingenuous, and I think the fact that these guys went to character assassination so fast, I think is obviously disingenuous, as I've already said before, because quite frankly, I can't think of any other words than these people are obviously fake. And lying-ass grifters too. The fact is that the Krasensteins, they're grifting off of this. Now, they'll sit here and tell you that they only made $450 and that they've got millions of dollars in their bank account, but the truth be told is these guys just are not very bright. I advise you guys go check out that debate and go check out their takes on Twitter. They're actually pretty awful. Tim, I think, makes some extremely good points about here, especially when it comes to overall education to get people on the plane and whatnot. And, of course, sometimes those requirements may be a little bit different. I probably didn't do as good of a job explaining it, but I wanted to kind of get to the whole point of the fact that, of course, it does create paranoia. The fact of the matter is that affirmative action hires, this is the type of paranoia that's created. You want to make sure that the person who's actually doing the job is actually qualified. So Charlie Kirk having some level of paranoia here, some level of wanting to know what the hell the deal is. They want to make sure this person's qualified when they're actually not going to be able to find out. It's actually quite frankly justified, and I don't think it's racist at all. If anything, he's just sharing the same paranoia that a lot of other people would in fact share. It just so happens to be that liberals like the Krasensteins, who are grifters, they just want to go ahead and go straight to character assassination when there's actually a perfectly logical explanation to what it is that's actually going on here. So is Charlie Kirk justified in saying what he said? Well, you probably would say that maybe he should have put it a little bit differently, but at the same time, I think he's actually justified for feeling the way he does. Who was it? It was Wayne Dupree, I think, on Twitter. He got all up in his feelings. Not really relevant, but he got all up in his arms on Twitter for this. Where Hotep Jesus posted something I thought was very funny, but I think that Hotep Jesus was posting it mostly for comedic purposes. So the thing is this right here. Of course, people of color, of course, everybody out there can be qualified for certain jobs and be good at their jobs. However, the fear is that when somebody's being hired just because of their actual race or their ethnicity, just because of that there, or you start expanding to people who probably shouldn't be working the job, like, say, the mentally handicapped or those who are blind. I mean, blind pilots, think about that. When people hear this and they find this out, yes, they're probably going to be paranoid. And when you find out that there's very possible that plane parts are falling out of the sky, and, of course, you've got wheels breaking off, I think that the paranoia factor is actually quite justified. However, the thing is this right here. Who the hell created this paranoia? Who the hell was it that created not only the paranoia, but who was it that created all the mythical racism? Well, quite frankly, it was the mainstream media. So if you want to blame anybody for Charlie's paranoia, look no further than mainstream media. With that right there being said, guys, make sure you guys tell me what you think in the comments. I would really love to hear what you guys have got to say. Please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, sound off in the comments section, and I'll see you guys later.